First of all, I know I'm not saying Malazan properly. I have no idea how to pronounce anything. I'm just going to get that out of the way. And if you don't like the way I say Malazan, you're going to have to get over it because I literally have no other way. I can't train myself to say it differently. So there we go. Hello. Welcome to Sound and Fairy Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. So, today I am starting off my vlog for the Malazan books. So, the first book is Gardens of the Moon. Now, I'm not filming this segment right this second as a vlog. I'm filming it my usual setup. I just figured I would do a bit of an introduction before I start reading, where I'm most comfortable, which is here. So yeah, if you aren't sure what Malazan is, perhaps you've heard the name dropped in fantasy circles. It's this 13 book series that has a few more now, or the offshoots, I don't know, honestly. And it's a heavy military fantasy with a billion characters, multiple storylines, and lots of action. There's a lot of politics in it as well. Oh no, the Malafans are saying. A newbie reader, a woman no less, who is going to, shit on it. No, no, no. You and my comment section will be pleased to note that I'm in fact a fan of Malazan, and I probably read the series before most of you. What I have here is a first edition that I bought at Chapters Indigo for $10 because I liked the girl on the cover. I remember reading it at the cottage when I was 14 because it came out in 1999 when I was 13, so I bought it, brought it to the cottage, over my birthday, etc. So I then read the series as they came out, a couple years, after each year. I don't remember how often they came out. It was once a year or something like that. Anyway, given I am no longer, as you can probably tell, 13, this is definitely going to be a reread of something that I still remember bits and pieces of, but a lot I have forgotten. So for me, it's kind of like going into something new again, but with a bit more kind of preparation, because Malazan, at least I remember, and I mean I was 14, I found to be challenging. I don't know how challenging I'm going to find it as a almost 40-year-old, but we will see. So I just want to explain that I thought it'd be fun to do a vlog style where I do a mini talk after each chapter or two, like a kind of mini review. There are 26 chapters if we include the epilogue and prologue. So after I wrap up here, the rest of the video will be less formal, not like I'm ever formal, kind of where I'm holding the camera at myself and talking about each chapter, perhaps recalling things that I forgot from what I read before, pointing out things I thought were interesting. I have a feeling a lot of the vlog, though, will be just me fangirling on stuff that I forgot about. But anyway, before I get into the first one, the entire vlog is sponsored by a book that I actually think Malazan fans will really like. In fact, when I read it, the first thing I thought about was Malazan, and it inspired me to reread the series. So that book is Nethergeist, Book 1 by Nick Stevenson. This book comes out today, so happy launch day, Nethergeist. And here is the blurb. I'm going to hold the cover up while I read it because it's so cool. For thousands of years, the Emperor Goat, a necromancer so powerful he has declared himself God, has had an iron grip on the universe, causing most worlds to fall into disrepair. In a paranoid city of renegades, the last bastion of humanity holds out against his might. Aelia, the regent-elect, is friendless, single, the wrong sex, the wrong heritage, and apparently cursed. While attempting to rout a coup, she is selected by outside forces to search for the impending birthright of Alchemia, a mage who is said to be the only match for the Emperor. To save herself and her people, she must ally with heretic magi, necromantic freedom fighters, the human-hating reptilian Cryal, and her sworn foe, the cowardly, lifeless warlord Vespasian. So it's a complex literary fantasy. It features intense battles, snappy dialogue, and a world on the edge of ruin. It is very similar to Malazan. It's a badass book, actually. There's a military unit of sorcerers, fighting undead creatures in this portal realm. Aelia, the main character, is not only a woman, which I like, but she's bisexual, middle-aged, and she's just plain done with everything. And then there's Vespasian, my boy, an undead loser of a necromancer who just, has no self-esteem, and I just love him. And there's some great weird humor in the book, and there's this gay lizard guy who's like super surly, and a whole lot of undead bad guys. The lore is a bit heavy for a first book, but if you like complex, almost literary fantasy, and if you like kind of the style of Malazan that doesn't like hold your hand through the book, I think you'll like this. Also, the cover is like super sweet. I am affiliated with the author, so as I said, this is a sponsored post, but I have read this entire book and I really, really love it, and it reminded me of Malazan, and as I said, it inspired me to reread this series. So, onwards to the vlog for Gardens of the Moon. I am very, very excited about this because I remember really, really loving the series when I read it 20 plus years ago. So thanks.
Okay, so is this how I do this vlog thing? Anyway, the prologue and chapter one. So that was a long ass first chapter, 58 pages for the chapter and the prologue. I was like, okay, there's like 24 pages in this, and it's not that big of a book. So I kept reading it and reading it because I couldn't stop reading it. So I remember actually when I was reading it that I mentioned the book in my own book, What Branches Grow. One dude finds the book in an abandoned barn, like after the apocalypse, and it made me laugh because I was like, I forgot I did that. And I always like to include like personal Easter eggs in my writing. I'm sure that most authors do, but I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Anyway, so wow, that like took me back. I was scanning over the huge dramatis personae before I started, and I recognized a few of the names, but then I started reading and I was like, oh yeah, that person, and oh yeah, that person. I remember what happens to them, and I was like, oh no. First of all, getting into it, the prologue is excellent. It's short. It fully situates you in the world, explains the situation, but not in an info dumpy way. And at least for me, having a strong female character in a fantasy book at the start is a real draw. I mean, nowadays it's rare not to have good female characterization in fantasy, but 20 years ago, in the late 90s, it was pretty rare. So for me, at 14, 13, I kind of gravitated towards stories that had that, like Dragonlance, for example. So I think that's probably one of the main reasons why I started reading this book was because of the Empress right away. Yeah, so then we jump into chapter one, and it's 8 years later, and we have Lucine Surly is the Empress. They mention, I think, how she starts out as a grunt in the army, but I can't recall for the life of me what the circumstances were that got her up to being the Empress. Was it because of the magic? I don't remember. And so I'm like curious now because I was like, I don't remember any of this. I also entirely forgot that Lauren, the adjunct, is in the book from the very start. I thought she showed up later, but that's my memory for you. I honestly thought she was only in the book for like the last three books, but I guess she's there from the very start. But also I've read what, like 1,000 books since I read this first, so there is that. Anyway, I paid close attention on this read while I was reading because sometimes you kind of you don't read like you're reading a text. You read it like you're reading for fun. So I kind of read it a bit more closely, I guess you could say. And as such, I vaguely remember what the deal with Sori was and the Prophet and Riga. But again, I can't tell you those specifics. I'm like, I know these names. I vaguely remember what's happening, but I don't know. And then when Cotillion and Amanus arrived, I was like, oh my god, those freaking dudes. How did I forget those guys? I recall liking Genos, and I still do. It's hard to make a rich kid likable, especially for me, but he does it in this like mimetic way, him meaning the author, Erickson, by, showing Ganos specifically taking on a terrible job. And so kind of we feel like Lauren, we're like, oh, actually this kid's not too bad. He's not really a spoiled brat. But that part when he rides the horse into the throne room, that was so funny. I forgot that this book is sometimes quite funny. Yeah. One thing I think that the first chapter clarified for me is why, when I first read this book, it was often why I thought it was confusing and why people often say it's confusing. It's because it doesn't hold your hand. Nothing is spelled out for you. Do we know the hounds are what killed the people? No, but we can easily infer that. Likewise, there's a big political element to it that like like likely bored me when I was 14. So I probably like glossed over those parts, but now I'm like, give me all the politics, give me all of this backstabbing. There's a lot of doubt and distrust too, which keeps you from like knowing who to take at face value. So I find that really fun too, that you're kind of the narrator, there's not really a narrator, but it's kind of like everyone's an unreliable narrator because you're not really sure what everyone's kind of deal is other than I guess Ganos. So it's really interesting because the book is third person limited omniscient, which is very hard to do. Fully omniscient is almost easier, I would say, because you can like tell when like you can tell stuff when you please, like when it pleases you for the plot, but limited is harder because you have to balance head hopping with giving too much information, or it'll come across as like giving too much, it'll confuse everybody. And so I think that actually the approach to this style is really well done, and it's great because we don't get all the information right away about anything, and I think that's really fun. It's very immersive and I'm super enjoying it. This book starts off so well. It was great for a first chapter, even though it was so long. But where's my boy? Where's Talk the Younger? Like, where is he? I thought he was in the book already, but I guess not. Maybe he's in the next chapter. So yeah, onwards to chapter two. I promise that not every section is gonna be this long. I just obviously the first chapter has a lot kind of going on and a lot to talk about. So my hand is shaking now because I've been holding my phone up for like 6 minutes. So yeah. So here I am with chapters 2 and 3. So chapter 2 starts off 2 more years later, and it introduces a character that I can't believe I forgot about, which is Hairlock, which is he turns into a marionette, which I completely forgot about somehow. And then Tattersail, who is a sorceress who's like what 219 years old, I believe. It also introduces us to the whole setting of the Pale, which is a city, which I always, for some reason, thought was not a city until now. I don't really understand where my brain was 20 years ago. It also introduces all of the characters, like the different, not the characters, the different kind of players in this war that aren't the emperor and what they have to do with one another, like, and explains more about kind of the Talana Mas and the Moonspawn and all of these people. In terms of the plot, it also talks about, I guess, bridge burners a bit more. Um, the so they were the old emperor's kind of like right hand people, I guess, and now that the emperor is gone, they're kind of like being sent on these like hard ass missions, I guess, to kind of like kill them off, I guess. I can't remember. Anyway, we also have this huge battle, which was really cool, like a very big mage battle against so the Moonspawn, as I remember it, is like a moving fortress, I guess, and it's the Malazan's main enemy is the Tistiandi sorcerers, and they live there. And anyway, so they decide to try to tackle this giant castle, and then they get totally destroyed. But there is a bit of an intrigue here where Tattersail doesn't believe that the attack that took out a couple really strong mages actually came from that bastion. She thinks it came from someone else. She thinks it came from Taishren, I think is how you say his name, who is one of the high mages, or the high mage to the emperor. And so there's like a whole thing of like, why is this happening? Who did this? Blah blah blah. And so they're starting to like figure out who did this. One of the things that I really liked about this section was it had really good like military banter, at least the start of it. It becomes more, I find, like later in the series, but I really liked that it got a bit more kind of funniness to this section, even though it was a terrible thing that was happening, a bunch of people just dying. Uh what else is there? We also learn about Kural de Gurlane. I can't pronounce any of these fantasy names, which is like elder magic. And there's more explanation about kind of what this magic does. Tattersail does a bunch of like tarot stuff to like tell her kind of what the gods are doing, because the gods are like real people. They're, what is it, ascendants, so they're like, they used to be people who like leveled up, I guess. I think they explain it later, and I've never really, I don't know if I ever really fully understood it when I was younger, so I'm really hoping to kind of understand it a bit more. Oh, what else? I have notes here because I'm an old woman and I can't remember anything. What else happened here? We have my boyfriend, Talk the Younger, who showed up. I don't know why. So when I was like 15, I don't know, I think I had a super crush on his character for some reason. I don't know why. We barely see him in this one. Maybe it's because he's like, kind of weird and he's a poet. I don't know. So we'll have to see what my if I can decipher what my 15-year-old brain was thinking when I read more about it, because I'm pretty sure he has a bit more in the rest of the book. But anyway, so there's the character that I was like in love with as a teenager. And what else happens? Oh yeah, so um, we get confirmation that Cotillon, however you say it, is possessing Sori, and we learn that Ganos Perrin is sent to lead the bridge burners. Basically, they think he's going to die, I guess, because the captains all keep dying. And yeah, it's a
a lot kind of happened in these two chapters. So we'll see what happens in chapter 4, and yeah. Okay, so you can see I'm very bundled up today because if you couldn't tell from my voice, I have a cold yet again. So I am going to talk about chapters 4 all the way to chapter 10 because I started reading one night and I was like, I'll read one chapter a day. And then I just kept reading. And then that's probably why I'm sick. So I have notes here. I'm trying to like look at them. So there's a lot of information about random people. Decim Ultor, who was the old emperor's general, who's the knight of death for Hood, who renounced it, and then he was murdered. I was like, oh, right, that whole thing. So this is where we really start to get into the whole antecedents and the gods and stuff like that in the book, because that was the stuff that, to be honest, I think because I was young, I didn't really understand, and now I kind of get it. So there's also the question of who is Quick Ben. I have a vague memory that he is someone important in the end, but I can't remember who he is. So it's just like, okay, just kind of flying by the seat of my pants here. What else? Oh yeah, we think that Perrin is killed, and then he meets the twins Opon, and they give him a deal to spare him. So the Hound attacks, and then Perrin kills it, or Perron, however you say his two names. I'm just gonna call him Perrin Genios. Anyway, so despite what everyone says, people are always saying, "Oh, Tattersail is such a great sorceress," blah blah blah. I don't know. It's hard to actually see that she is useful. She tends to get like kind of freaked out and makes mistakes like all the time. I'm like, how is this woman like 200 years old and she's so crappy? But maybe I just don't remember, or maybe I just find her kind of wishy-washy and that's why I don't really like her that much. But yeah, it's kind of frustrating that she's like this powerful sorceress, but she seems to kind of not be powerful. They explain it later that, the fact that she was able to ward off the Hound for as long as she did and all this stuff was impressive. But given we don't know that much about the Warrens at the time, I'm kind of like, oh, okay, so she gets attacked by a dog. Then we get on to chapter 5. We get introduced to Croup or Croupy or whatever his name is. This guy's a god, right? I can't remember. He's somebody important in the end. Everybody's somebody important in the end, I think. And then we get introduced to Crocus Younghand. I remember he has that whole thing where he falls in love with that girl when he's robbing her house. He ends up being attacked by assassins and escapes them. That whole thing. Then we move on to chapter 6, which is... I can't read my writing here. Oh yeah, that's all about the counselors and their kind of whole thing where some of the counselors want to keep the Malazans out, some of the counselors want to let them in. It's a whole political thing. There's also a bad guy called the Eel, and then there's the Crone. There's all these people we get introduced to, and then they kind of disappear for a while. We also get introduced to Anomander Rake, who's the Tisty Andy, and he wants to kill the rest of the Empire's wizards. I can't remember why. And then there's also a bunch of other stuff about this, and I'm like, okay. I have these notes because I will forget, and these notes are for when I read further books. Chapter 7 is just a couple dudes talking. It's not that exciting. It ties in later to the whole thing about the Malazans and the wizards and stuff, but it's not like the most exciting chapter. Chapter 8, so we're back with the Malazans again, and it's a plan to get into the city. They're talking about basically breaking into it and taking it from the inside. We find out that Tattersail is alive, but she's in a coma, and Quick Ben controls Harlock, but just barely. So there's a power struggle there that I kind of forgot about. And then chapter 9, we get my boy Talk again. I love Talk the Younger. So he's still at Pale. He's hanging out with the Barghasts, which seem to be kind of like an indigenous population. I'm not super thrilled with kind of how they're handled, but they are badass, so that's cool. We also get introduced to Tool, who is Onos Tulan. He's a Tulan Amas. He's one of those undead people. And we also get a bunch of other name drops of other kind of famous mages and Tlasamon and stuff like that I wrote all their names down so I could remember later who they are. There is a Dramatis Personae at the start, but I still can never, keep track of anybody. And also in chapter 9, we have the adjunct again. We have Lorne. She explains how sorcery doesn't work on her. We're not told why yet. We learn later. We also learn that Tattersail and Lorne had a huge kind of thing in Lorne's backstory. She was 9 years old, living in kind of the poor area, and Tattersail killed her entire family in a purge. So
What's interesting is that in this scene, Lorne could have exacted revenge. She could have killed Tattersail then and there, and nobody would have stopped her. But she manages to repress this hatred, this intense hatred she has inside her in such a way that everybody's freaked out by it because they're like, oh, if she can not kill this woman who killed her entire family because she's that devoted to the Empress, then that is actually very terrifying because what else would she do to keep the Empress, you know, satisfied or to be honor to or to show her loyalty to her. So I found that was very fascinating, especially given how long Lauren is in the story for. Yeah, so there was that little dinner party. That's where that all happened. We also have Tattersail and Perrin hooking up, which I was like, oh, okay, fun. I forgot about that. I think Perrin hooks up with a bunch of people, doesn't he, over the course of the books? I can't remember. The one thing about this series is that I don't find the love story aspects are very. They're compelling, but they're not brought out enough. They're always kind of told in passing, or we get like a hint of it, but then it's never kind of fulfilled. I'm thinking of the one from, is it the Bone Hunters? There's one, a really good one in that one, or am I confusing it with the disgusting one? Uh, anyway, so we don't really get kind of passion, I guess you can say, in these books. You're not going to be getting, any romance with a capital R in Malazan, which is fine. You know, you can ship your characters in your mind if you want. But I do like a bit more romance in my stories. But this one just has so much awesome world building and lore and just so much going on. It's so deep that you don't really need it. But yeah, so that's just my opinion on that. I said chapter 10, but I think I meant that I only got to chapter 10 or only got to chapter 10. So I will give you chapter 10 and probably a few more next time. I think I'm going to break this more into like 5 or 6 chapters at a time because it's hard to find the time to record these vlog things. Wow, this lighting really like makes my eyebrows look really huge. I'm back again, and now I'm not sick. So this is going to be kind of my overview of chapters 11 to 20 because I read most of the chapters when I was sick, and you wouldn't want to see a vlog of me sick. Yeah, so chapter 11 was kind of a big one. It's where we find out that Tattersail has been shape-shifted, or she's soul taken, they call it. They took her soul basically and put it in this fetus of this Rivi woman, and basically we learn that so she's still kind of alive, but we're not sure if she's going to remember who she is when she grows up. Kind of interesting. So that was kind of fascinating. This is also where we learn that the bridge burners have been kind of sneaking into Jerusalem and planting mines in the street. Basically, no one cares that they're doing this because they look like construction workers, which reminded me of of the Trailer Park Boys because Ricky from Trailer Park Boys one time says, "Oh yeah, if you're wearing construction gear, nobody cares what you do. They just think you're supposed to be there," which is true. So I thought that was really funny. Oh, let's see what else happens in that chapter. A lot happens in that chapter. So we learned that Jerusalem originally started as a treasure-seeking camp. I thought that was really fascinating. I love kind of learning how cities come about and how, I thought that was really cool that the city just came about because of that, because of these tombs that become important a little bit later on. We find out for sure that Sori has been possessed by Cotillion. We knew this the whole time, but basically we find out for real. We find out that Crocus wants to learn to be a gentleman to impress that Chalice girl that he met one time, which I thought was kind of funny. And then we see that Quickben is trying to talk to Shadow Throne. So that was a really interesting chapter. We had a lot going on in that chapter. Chapter 12 has a lot of information in it too. Chapters 11 and 12 just have a lot going on. So in this one, we find out that both Tattersail and Hairlock are going to the Gadrobi Hills, where the Jaga tyrant is located. We also see all the dogs in Shadow Throne's realm. Quickben goes there. We find out that he used to be a Shadow Throne acolyte, which is interesting. He makes a deal with Shadow Throne to get him to stop sending assassins after him if he can
provide him with the one who wanted to take Gear's soul. And then we find out that Barak or whatever sent Krupi and his team to the Gadrobi Hills too. So this was kind of like a lot of background on Quick Ben. We still don't know everything about him, and I still can't remember anything about his background, so because my memory is terrible. Chapter 13 is interesting because it has a lot of people questioning why they're doing things. You know, the bridge burners are like, why are we doing all of this? And we find out that their goal eventually is to win Darujhistan, and then they can go AWOL. They want to take off and they want to hide from the Empress because they know that she wants them dead. So I thought that was really fascinating that they're well aware of what they're doing, but they're kind of trapped. And that's what's interesting about the whole series, is that it's not like a rah, you know, war is great thing. It's actually that war sucks, and these people have been like conscripted into it, or they joined it not realizing what they were getting into. And I thought that was really fascinating. This chapter also has the assassins battle, which, to be completely honest, I still am not really sure what's going on with that, and I don't really care because I don't think it really matters overall in the series. It's not something you really have to remember. So we learn that Anomander Rake shows up during the assassins battle because he's there to take out the guild in order to prevent the Malazans from making a deal with them. It's very complicated. We also learn that his sword is Dragnapur, which is the Knight of High House Darkness's sword. There's a lot of words here, but I wrote them down so I'll be able to look them up later. So chapter 14 is kind of a little bit more backstory. Tool tells us basically that he's expendable, that the reason they sent him was that his Warren is the Barrow Warren, and somehow this makes him expendable. I can't remember. Anomander Rake can stop the Jagat Tyrant, but it would cost him heavily. We have Talk, my boy, seeing visions, and then we also have Crocus's group heading out, and Sori's going after them. A whole bunch of kind of little things are happening in this chapter. So chapter 15 is the heartbreaker of a chapter for me because Hairlock chucks Talk into the Warren, and I was like, no! And then kind of an awesome part of this chapter is when Lauren shows up and just kicks everyone's freaking ass. She kicks Cole's ass, she kicks, Krupe out, she kicks everybody's ass, and it was awesome. Even though she's kind of unlikable as a character, she's a real badass, really. She's like a subtle badass. So I like Lauren actually a lot. So chapter 16 is interesting because it's kind of where Quick Ben's little plot comes about, and we see how smart he is and how great he is at magic. So Hairlock is attempting to escape after shoving poor Talk into the Warren, but then Quick Ben roots him in place and sends the hounds after him. He roots him in place by, I guess, cutting his marionette strings, and then Rake shows up to save Perrin from the hounds, and he kills 2 of them, the poor hounds. And then he tells Shadowthrone basically to frig off, and that his fight is with the Malazans, not with him. And then Perrin, who's kind of just bewildered standing around, he tells him that Opon has left him because, I can't remember why, but the sword that he has is still blessed by them. It's complicated. There's a lot of soul possession and things like that in this book, which is cool. What's really interesting, though, is that Perrin realizes that his hatred and anger towards Lorne and Hairlock was their anger and hatred, not really his. Like, he was mad at her for kind of treating him like a pawn, but his hatred, I always thought it was weird too. I was like, why is he so angry about this? It doesn't seem like that big of a deal. And then you realize that, oh, he was being controlled. And that's a really interesting point actually about the series, because often with demon possession and stuff, people are either aware that they're possessed or they're not aware, and it doesn't really affect them other than like kind of physical things. But in this one, they're actually influencing people's emotions, and I thought that was really, really interesting because it makes people kind of wonder, are they still the same person they are when they're possessed? And I thought that was a really cool kind of concept. Chapter 17 is a short one. The Empress wants Darujhistan, but she wants it unharmed. Rake basically wants to keep it from her, but not destroy it. That's basically all we learned in that chapter. Chapter 18. So Perrin basically rescues Cole, takes him to Darujhistan. Rallic attacks Oislet, who is attempting to assassinate Cole. There's a whole thing about how Cole's ex-wife did him dirty, and now she's paired up with that Turban Ore guy. And to be honest, there's a lot of kind of like low-level politics that I'm not as interested in as the high-level stuff, so I didn't really care too much about this whole thing. So Callum finds Perrin at the inn, and then he orders Perrin to go and get Mallet to save Cole. Perrin tells Whiskey Jack that he thinks they're being set up, and he agrees to be on their side, which is good. And then we learn about the Finnist, which is a self-contained Almtoast Pelak Warren, which is what holds the Jagut Tyrant's power. It's shaped like an acorn, and Lauren has this thing. So how's that going to come into play? I don't remember. Chapter 19, I think this is the first time this is introduced, but I can't remember. It might have been mentioned before, but this is the first time we're actually told that the Panian Seer is a person, and it is a person in the southern part of the world who is waging this holy war on, I think, the Malazans. I should have made better notes on this one. And so we learn that that's happening too. So that kind of, I think that spreads to other books. I think like Deadhouse Gates and stuff is set in that area. I can't remember. I'd have to read them all. And then chapter 20, so what's interesting about this chapter is that it really highlights that war isn't just attacking a city. It's more complex than that. Like we have a lot of moving facets here to determine the fate of the city, and it's not just about like one. It's not even about just taking it over like playing Risk, you know. It's definitely a lot more complicated than that, and I think that's really interesting and fascinating. The world building is so immersive in this one as well. I love it has that cycle of the age machine, like who built it, why. We're kind of told a little later, but it doesn't really explain anything. I really love these little tidbits in the world that aren't really explained, and I think that that's really fun, and it really kind of builds out the world building. We find out that Krupe is this eel person that's been running things in the background, who's been messing about. And one of my favorite things about it is that we learn that Amanda Rake is going to attend the fete, which is the party hosted by Lady Simtal, which is Cole's ex-wife. Yeah, so we're going into kind of the last little bit of the book here, and a lot of it takes place, I think I remember, at this party. So yeah, that was long. I am back again for the final 5 chapters plus epilogue of Malazan Garden of the Moon. I'm in my kids' room. I do not live in a purple room myself. We're doing a renovation here, and it's just the lighting is nice in here. Also, their bed's comfortable. Do you like my new flooring? You can see the old flooring. We ripped up the carpet, and now we're like installing this new hardwood. I'm like, oh, so excited. So chapter 21, this is the party. They go to Lady Sintel's party, her fete. And the best part of this chapter is that Turban Orr has no idea who Amanda Rake is. I thought that was so funny. It's like he's like 1,000 years old or whatever, and this guy's like, I don't know who the hell you are. That's like me with like celebrities. I would meet a celebrity in real life and be like, I don't know who you are. So then Rallick kills Orr in a duel. We expected this to happen. And then Circle Breaker, whom I don't think I even talked about. He's kind of like a minor character who just like errands for the eel. He gets put into retirement mode, and I thought that was kind of nice, I guess. It would have been kind of nice if we'd had more of him in the story to really care, but I was like, all right. Then we moved to chapter 22, and this one's really got a lot going on. So Krupe goes into one of his other dream state things. He meets up with the Jagut tyrant named Race, and after a whole bunch of nattering on and on, Race just jumps bodies. He goes into someone else. Who does he go into? You'll find out. Meanwhile, Crocus is rejected at the party by Chalice. I mean, honestly, as he should be. Chalice isn't the nicest girl, but Crocus broke into her house and stared at her when she was sleeping. He stole her stuff. Like, I wouldn't date that guy. In fact, I would have been irritated if she was like, oh yeah, I love you, blah, blah, blah. I mean, also Crocus is like, what, like 16 or something? He'll get over it. Yeah, I was just like, okay, good. I'm glad that this happened to him. It's good for him. Also, he's a much better match for Sori. I thought they were so cute together. Sori meets Callum in the garden. Mallet discovers that the seer lady, has been in there protecting her, actually, from Cotillion, making sure that she didn't go completely insane. So thank you, Riga. Women helping women. Callum and Vorken, the Assassin Guild leader lady, and I was like, oh, another sweet lady that I can think is cool. They meet and they discuss her killing all of the mages because she happens to be a high mage as well. So that's kind of a cool twist. I can't remember if we knew that already. Rallick, because he was covered in that Oteral dust, which prevents magic from working on you, they're making him sit on the stump that is doing something odd in the courtyard. I love how these like little weird details like the dust and stuff come back in the story. It's intricately plotted. I'm always curious about like how authors plot things. And so I'm like, did he just like was he like, oh actually this makes sense, or did he have this plotted out from the start? I don't know. And so curious about that. So we find out that Mamet, who is Crocus's uncle, that he is possessed by the Jagot Tyrant. He starts flipping out. Perrin, in the meantime, is just sucked into some other realm. So the Telonomos is in there. He tries to kill Perrin, but Perrin has the hound's blood in him from when he stabbed the um, hound before, which stops him. And then back at the party somehow, Quick Ben opens all of his warrens on Mamet. Hedge blasts Mamet with a munition, which I thought was amazing, and then he dies. And then after this, Callum discovers that the bombs that they've placed around the city actually won't just kind of cause mass chaos. They will blow the city to smithereens because of all the gas lines of this one minor lamplighter comment we got earlier on. So again, with the small details having big repercussions, I thought that was really cool. And then we move to chapter 23. So Perrin, who's still hanging out in this weird dimension, meets Cotillion. Then he goes after Lorne. We find out that Rake is a black dragon, which is super cool. There's a bunch of dragon fighting and stuff. We also run into the Crimson Guard under Callan and Brood briefly. So it's Corporal Blues, Cowl, and Fingers. Corporal Blues fights Lorne as she is sent as she's so Corporal Blues is there to protect Crocus from Lorne. She actually gets her ass handed to her for once, and she takes off wounded, and then Mies and that other woman kill her, which I thought was so random and funny. I was like, okay, because they want to protect Crocus as well. Perrin finds her body. He takes the sword that she has. Opon shows up, and Perrin tells them basically to screw off. So yeah, he finally gets his body back, his brain back. Then we get to chapter 24. This is Rake versus that sweet demon of Tayshrens. So Vorkin comes for Baruch and Duradon, that other kind of witch lady. Sarat, which was one of Animander Rake's generals or whatever, she tries to protect them, but Vorkin is a high mage assassin and, hurts her quite badly. Crocus shows up and whips a bunch of bricks at Vorkin, and then she takes off, and I thought that was also quite funny. I was like, wow, this like super powerful assassin lady gets taken out by some bricks. And then after all of this, Dujek shows up, and he says that he's been outlawed by the Empress, and he plans to join with Kaladin Brood's team if they'll take him. The stump, meanwhile, we haven't forgotten about the stump, turns into a weird house. It turns into a house. I kind of pictured it as like a Howl's Moving Castle kind of house for some reason. I don't know why. Vorkin arrives there. She passes out. Rallick takes her inside the house. It turns out that the house is owned or part of or whatever of the Azaf, which are like powerful beings. I'm not really sure, to be completely honest, who the Azaf are, but there's another house in Malice City that made the Emperor the Emperor. That made the Emperor called the Dead House. And I'm pretty sure that relates somehow to Dead House Gates. I think so. Another book, which is book 3 or 4, I don't know. And then after all of this happens, all this gets wrapped up, we get an epilogue where Perrin is hanging out at Lauren's grave. He's thinking of Tattersail again. He clearly really loved her a lot. And that's kind of thing I was saying in one of my other vlog posts about how, like, there's love stories in this, but they don't seem to be as strong as they are about how people react. Like, I just thought that Tattersail and Perrin were just, like, having some fun. I didn't realize he loved her. So, this kind of, I guess, reinforces the fact that he loves her. And I'm like, oh, well, that's cute. Too bad I, didn't really feel this depth before. And then we have Crocus and her name Apsalar now. Sorry, they're gonna go away together. And I was like, oh, how cute, a nice little happy ending. Yeah, happy ending. One of the only ones I think we get. So yeah, that's the end of Gardens of the Moon. As I said, I was really happy to have reread this. I absolutely loved it. I find it so immersive. And while there are times when the book is frustrating because you're like, who the hell is this friggin' guy again? That kind of stuff. If you really, like, read it closely, it's not confusing. It definitely was confusing to me when I was, like, as I said, like 14 when I first read it. But you know, as in your 40-year-old, I think I can handle it. And yeah, it's definitely not the most confusing book I've ever read. Yeah, so I hope if you've read Garden of the Moon, you liked my little vlog. Is this how you're supposed to do vlogs? I don't know. I don't think I'll be doing another one of these again for any time soon because it took a lot of work to film all this stuff. Mainly because I don't know why. I'm posting these videos on the internet, but I'm shy about recording when people are like at my house, so I had to like do it like when no one's around. Yeah, so let me know in the comments who your favorite Malazan character is. I mean, you guys already know who my favorite character is, and it's obviously Talk the Younger, my boy. Oh, oh, oh no. I know what happens to him, and I'm sad.